My name is Emily. I'm a writer for The Contrarian, and this week I wrote a little piece about the surprisingly left-wing political history of sourdough, plus a little recipe for these delicious sourdough crackers, which I'm going to show you how to make right now. Sourdough first started becoming politically popular in the 1960s and 70s when it was embraced by members of the Back to Land movement. It was basically seen as a way to remove yourself from the American industrialized food system, and in a time when the only commercially available bread was kind of like Wonder Bread style, you can see why it might have appealed. By the 1970s, sourdough recipes were becoming common in cookbooks, including the Tassajara cookbook, which is this incredibly influential book published by a monastery, of all things, and also this wonderful little handwritten cookbook called the Alaska Sourdough Bread Book. For all of these groups, sourdough was a symbol of going back to your roots, but it was also a symbol of the collective. It was easy to make, it was cheap, you could feed a lot of people with just a few ingredients. So it was kind of radical, the act of making a loaf of sourdough bread and sharing it with your community. Then came the TRAD wives. I couldn't actually find who first popularized the use of sourdough as a signifier of conservative womanly virtue, but by this point it's kind of a cliche. We've all seen it, and I've even seen people posting sourdough recipes with like a little disclaimer that say like, they're not like that, which I think is very funny. Basically, sourdough has shifted from being a symbol of communal abundance to a symbol of virtue within your own home. Instead of taking care of large groups of people, your community, operating, say, a non-profit bakery, which was a thing that happened in the 1970s after the sourdough revolution, which I think is so cute. Instead, you're baking for your husband, for your children, for your home. You're baking as a signifier of your own virtue as a wife and mother. Now, was it only TRAD wives who were baking sourdough? Obviously not. Here I am. I have a job. But I do think it's interesting that sourdough in particular has become such a signifier of feminine virtue in the TRAD wife space. Some things that I found TRAD wives saying about sourdough baking is that it's a sensory activity, it's something that's immersive, it's something that forces you to be in your body rather than in your mind, and also, critically, it takes all day. So theoretically, you have to be hanging around the house, not doing anything but baking sourdough. Which is not true, by the way, but that's what they think. So how do we return sourdough to its radical roots? I think a big part of it is decoupling the idea of health and wellness. Right now we have this idea of eating well and living well that's very much grounded in individual choices. This idea that I am healthy because of the choices that I make that lead me to be healthy. So I'm healthy because I can afford to go to the gym. I'm healthy because I can have the time to bake sourdough bread for my family. And of course, the reality is in America, so many of us are on the very precarious edge. We have this frankly very Calvinist idea that somehow our virtues are going to protect us from the infirmaries of our body, when the truth is to exist in a human form is to be fragile, and to exist in America is, for so many of us, to be merely one paycheck away from bankruptcy. So many Americans don't have enough money in their savings account to cover an unexpected emergency of any kind, medical or otherwise. So, if you're looking to return to a cleaner, back to the land lifestyle, the answer isn't baking sourdough in the privacy of your own home, but perhaps bringing the spirit of sourdough to your neighborhood. The TRAD wives might not like it, but charity begins at home, and it continues and expands and redounds into the universe. I know all this sounds like a tall order, but you gotta start somewhere, and at least this way, you'll end up with some delicious sourdough crackers.